Hello everyone, and welcome to today's video where I'm going to show you something brand new from the new core catalogue. This is something that I turn the page to quickly to see what we have in store. There's so many good things in here, but I always look to see what the new stencils are going to be. We have such a big collection. There are 12 by 12 stencils. This is a travel type theme, and I love all of these ones here as well. And we also have two card front sizes. We have the regular A2 and we have the slim line. But in today's video, I'm going to use stencil pack 1 and specifically these two stencils here to create a double page layout. I hope you enjoy using stencils as much as I do. They create so much visual interest to backgrounds and to other elements as well. And these ones are particularly special because they layer as well. So I'm going to show you how to do that today. You can see I've got these out ready to use. I'll just show you a couple of little things that I'm not going to use in today's. There is a cityscape. So you have a background part and then you can layer this one over top. I'm going to use this explore title, but another layering element on this one are these trees, which are like silver birches or aspen type trees. And then you can layer this over the top and put the little markings on as well. But I am going to be using a couple of these today to do some layers with the stencils and also to put some backgrounds. You can see I've got some paper here ready to go, and I've edge distressed this with scissors. This is the Hope and Kindness coordinating cardstock, and at the time of me doing this video, this was still available to order. Now you're going to get quite a bit of paper fluff here. I'm just going to move this aside. I'm just going to do this bit first. I keep my microchip scissors closed and I'm being quite heavy-handed with this. So when you've got a larger piece, you're better off to hold it and just work in small sections at a time. And that way you have a little bit more control. If the paper does tear at all, just go with it because you're looking for a distressed look. And because all of our pattern paper and cardstock has a white core, this works really, really well to give you a lovely roughed up edge. And when I get down to the bottom, I just go back the other way. But you can see by doing it in smaller increments, it actually gives you a little bit more control than trying to do the whole lot in one go. So I am just going to get rid of some of this fluff. And if you wanted even more distressing, you could rip into this. Now add a little bit more here. And you could bend the paper back a little bit more as well. And I've done that with 3 sections. So my plan for this is to have these going along like strips and tucking these parts underneath. I really love how this paper looks. And there is another pattern on the other side, but I really like this wash type look on this one. Now with the plan for this, I've got my paper running across this way and I've already done the right page, most of it, just to speed up this process. And what I'm going to do for the first lot of inking for the background is bring in this street type grid and put that on the page. So I'm going to have it coming off the area like this, and I'm going to secure this. You can secure with washi tape, or I've got some blue painter's tape just to hold everything in place. And you saw me rub that on my hand just to remove some of the tack, so it makes it easier to remove when I go to pick this up. So that's nice and secure now. I'm going to bring in some shortbread ink. When I'm doing this, I'm coming off the edge, but if I do get a little blotch like I've got here, I'm not going to worry too much about it. And I'm bringing this in, but I'm not going right to the edges because I don't want a defined edge to this. I want it to look fairly organic. I know that my paper is going to go across here, so up here I don't have to worry too much, but across this area here I don't want the harsh edges of that line. Now the amount of ink that goes on with this depends on how heavily you push. I generally don't hold these up here. I generally hold them down near the head. I feel like I've got more control. And I'm just lightly pressing in. Here I was a little bit heavy-handed. I'm going to have a little look at this and see what I've got. And that's what I need. So you can see what I mean. This has blend it out into the paper rather than giving harsh lines. And now I'm going to do another area up here in the other corner. So I'm loving how that looks, and while I've got this stencil in use, I'm going to bring in a tag, and this has been cut on the Cricut, and it's a 2-inch wide tag, and I've just manipulated it so that it extends all the way down rather than a short tag. I wanted some longer tags for this. And I'm actually doing this on Almond cardstock. Almond is actually retired, but I have quite a stash of it, and it is still available to order. It was one of my all-time favourite neutrals. So I thought I would bring it out to go with this, and I do have Almond ink, but I thought I would try this with some shortbread over top. And the reason why I'm doing this one now is because I want to do some layering on top of this with more stencils. I'm just going to have a little peek to see what I've got. And I only want this fairly subtle because, as I said, I'm going to do some more treatments to this. I'm just going to call that quits and be happy with what I've got there. It's a really subtle look, but I love it. Before I clean this stencil off, I'm going to do another part of stenciling on here, and it's going down in the bottom left corner. So I don't know if you noticed before, this is a grid pattern here. You could use this grid pattern to layer up on a project, but it actually has another purpose. This is the base, and then this part here forms a suitcase. And I'm going to use shortbread ink again, and this time, instead of staying inside the areas, I want the whole entire piece. So I'm going to ink all the way around, making sure that I get the edges of this suitcase because I want the crisp edge to this. So I can take that away, and this is what I've got. And then I'm going to line up the suitcase pieces and secure my stencil again. And this time I'm going to bring in Pine, which is a brand new colour. It's absolutely gorgeous. And at first I'm just doing a fairly light hand. And I want to make sure that I don't go over the edge here accidentally with my brush. So I'm going to mask that off just with a bit of the blue tape. And then I don't have to stress about it quite so much. And you can see all the patterns are coming through for the suitcase. So this is really, really cool the way these stencils have been designed to layer. And I'm going to stop there. I love how that looks. I know I didn't mask off this little bit here, and I should have, but it will be fine because I've got layers going on top of that. So that is part of the background. I'm going to do a couple more little treatments to that, but while I've got the stencil out, I'm going to move on to the next part and bring this tag in again, and I'll show you what I mean about securing a smaller piece to the stencil. You put the tape like so. I'm going to ink this up in different mediums, so I'm going to tape off this bit to make sure that I don't get any ink over here. And I'm going to use Pine again for the live and the love and go over top. If you wanted to, you could have these in 2 different colours and mask this piece off and just do one word at a time. And then I'm going to set this aside to dry, this piece, because I'm going to do the travel with some embossing ink. And I want this to be totally dry before I put the embossing powder onto it. Now you do need to clean your stencils after you've used them. You can either run them under the tap, and just depending on what ink you've been using, I've been using a water-based dye ink, so I can just clean these off with a baby wipe, and I do the front and the back sides because sometimes when you're cleaning, you saw me before wipe off my all-purpose mat, the ink does go through and you do pick up quite a bit of ink, so you do need to remember. And I'm going to clean off the rest of this. You do need to be a little bit gentle when you're doing this because there are fine pieces. You don't want to drag too much and tear the acetate. It is pretty sturdy, but if you're too rough, I think it can happen. You can bend pieces back. So just a dab or just go lightly in one direction. Now I'm going to do a subtitle for my layout. Now I've cut my piece of white daisy purposefully higher than I need it to be. So I'm going to line my word up down near the bottom and I'm going to trim it down to 1 inch in height. But I've given myself some room just so I've got enough to hold everything together and to be able to move everything down. So when you're thinking about doing a layered stencil like this, I'm going to do the lightest colour in the background and I'm bringing in Glacier ink for that, and I really only need it to be mainly in the top 2/3 section. It doesn't matter if you get it down the bottom part, but it will affect it depending on what ink you're using. And I know that the layers that I'm putting over this are going to work quite well together because I've done a little test run. So now I need to reposition my stencil and line up this bottom section. So I'm hoping my head doesn't get in the way, but I really want to make sure that I get these pieces as close as possible to where they're intended to go. So just excuse if my head gets in the way for a little bit. Then I'm going to secure this and I'm coming in with shortbread ink. And this is where the magic all starts to happen. So you can see I'm inking shortbread ink through, and it does change the colour a little bit when you mix shortbread with the glacier that's underneath. It's giving it a little bit of a greenish hue, and that's okay because these sort of represent mountains. So that's something that you need to bear in mind when you're doing layered stencils, what colours are going to play well together or if they're going to give you a muddy look, and that might not be something that you want. There's the magic starting to happen there. And then I can remove my tape and bring in the next layer. So apologies again if my head gets in the way. And this time I'm going to make sure that I mask all the way across because there isn't as much of a gap here as there was between these two. These two are quite close, so I do need to mask this so it's all the way across. I'm going to play with the sage ink first rather than doing the pine, because if I press a little bit harder I can get a good coverage with this, and I think pine might be too heavy for the purposes for this one, but that's just personal preference. Alrighty, let's have a look at what we've got underneath. I'm loving how that looks. So I'm going to trim this down, and I really love how that looks. I'm going to be matting this onto some Almond cardstock so you can see how well all the layers work together to create a gorgeous scene. You might decide that you only want to do 2 layers. You could just do the top 2, or you could do the top one and the third one. This one here runs all the way along the edge, so if you do use that over the top of your word, I would suggest using something fairly light, because if it's too dark it's going to mess with the bottoms of these letters and it won't be as easy to read. So I've gone ahead and put the first layer down, and when I've done the adhesive I've not quite done it to the edge so that I'm able to tuck these pieces under. I'm going to bring in some copy paper and my water brush. So I'm just smooshing some shortbread on, and then I'm going to smoosh some sage onto my all-purpose mat, and then I'm going to add some water, and I'll start with the shortbread, and I'm making a puddle. I don't want this to be too strong, and then I'm just going to put some splatters over the areas that I've done the stenciling. And then I'm just going to squeeze my water brush out to make it all nice and clean before I mix some of this sage ink. And I'm going to do exactly the same thing. I love how this gives just that additional extra touch to the layout and to the stenciling. I think it just gives a grounding effect to the layers that you've built up with your stenciling. I actually have 3 titles to this. So I've got the Explore that we created earlier. I've got another word that I have cut out on my Cricut that I've cut out of some retired wood paper, and I'm also going to have a subheading underneath this large one. So I'm just going to stamp that out, and I'm going to use pine and stamp it onto these pre-cut little pieces that fit these letters. So I've got all my letters stamped and I've actually got little mats for all of them. I cut all these pieces on my Cricut because I wanted them all exactly the same size. It's one of the layouts that I gave ladies to do on a recent weekend retreat that I organised, and everything was pre-cut and put it into little bags for them, but they had to do all the stamping and the stenciling and everything themselves. But doing this sort of thing on the Cricut means that I know that all these little rectangles will be exactly the right size. And now I'm going to finish off this tag. So before I do embossing on this, I need to use my anti-static pouch. And I've got a blending tool that I just keep for Versamark ink. You can press your pad through, but I like using it's a sponging tool for this. And I've got the Versamark refill, and I just put it onto the ink pad and then start smooshing it on. And I'm just pouncing this through to get a coverage with all of the letters. Clear off my stencil because that's a sticky ink, so even though you can't actually see it, you still need to clean that off. And I'm just going to emboss this with white powder. You can't actually see the ink on camera with this, but it is there. So that's all nicely covered, and then all I need to do is heat set that. I'm just going to distress the edges of this with some, I've got walnut stain Distress Oxide ink, just to give that a little bit more texture. And I've got another tag here that I've distressed the edges with my scissors, and I'm just going to tie the two together. So now all that's left for me to do is to line everything up. I've put 3D foam tape on the back of these letters, and with the letters I actually have printing around the edges of these as well, just to define the letters a little bit more. And then my little subtitle here for Getaway, bring this down just a little bit. I'm actually going to use the bottom edge of these photos to line up my word. So that's the left page. I'll adhere everything in a minute, and the right page is going to have tags, so they'll be adhered here, and the Explorer is going to go across here, and I'll put foam tape under those, I think. Here is the finished layout. You can see that I have added some wooden shapes to this. So I've used some hearts, some arrows, and the brackets as well. Some of the arrows are retired and the little geotag is retired, but I'm trying to use up all these little pieces that I have in my collection. I really love how the wooden elements just bring everything together, and I've also added some little dots of bisque liquid pearls to some areas of this, just to finish everything off nicely. I really love how all the stenciling is looking. I think it just adds the right amount of texture to this, and I'm really looking forward to adding my photos to this layout. And I will have a link below in the description to my Facebook page with the details for this layout, and I'll also have below a list of everything that I have used to create this layout. Thank you so much for tuning in. Happy crafting, and bye for now.